Yay, shoo! Lo, 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 lo.
On the morning of March 12, 2022, 5-year-old Daniel Cohen woke up screaming in his bedroom in Cambridge, Massachusetts. His parents, Jacob and Leah Cohen, rushed to his side, expecting the usual childhood nightmare about monsters or falling. What their son said next would change their lives forever. "I saw them nail him to the wood," Daniel sobbed, his small body trembling. "There was so much blood on the ground at Golgotha." Jacob and Leah exchanged confused glances. They had never discussed the crucifixion in such explicit terms with their son. They had certainly never mentioned Golgotha, the Aramaic name for the place of execution. The Cohen family was Jewish, culturally observant, but not deeply religious. Jesus' death was not a topic that came up at their dinner table. "Where did you hear that word, sweetheart?" Leah asked gently. Daniel looked at her with eyes that seemed far older than 5 years. "I didn't hear it. I was there." For those who believe miracles didn't stop 2,000 years ago, what you're about to hear will challenge everything. Over the next few days, Daniel's episodes intensified. He began drawing detailed scenes of ancient streets, buildings his parents didn't recognize. He spoke of a marketplace near a temple where he claimed he sold olive oil and spices. His descriptions were disturbingly specific. The texture of stone pathways, the smell of lamp smoke, the sound of Roman soldiers' sandals on cobblestones. "My name was Reuben," Daniel told his mother one evening while coloring. "Reuben Levi. I had a shop in the market. My wife's name was Abigail. We had 3 children." Leah felt her skin prickle. The certainty in her son's voice was unsettling. This wasn't the wandering imagination of a child. This was something else. Most disturbing of all were Daniel's descriptions of events after the crucifixion, moments that appeared nowhere in any text the Cohens knew. He spoke of riots in the streets, Roman soldiers interrogating merchants, a collective fear that paralyzed Jerusalem for weeks. He described hiding 2 people in his home while soldiers searched door to door. "Who did you hide?" Jacob asked, despite his skepticism. "The woman and the young man," Daniel replied simply. "After they killed the teacher, everyone was looking for his followers. I kept them safe for 3 days. Jacob Cohen, a 36-year-old civil engineer, prided himself on rational thinking. Leah, a 35-year-old public school teacher, shared his scientific worldview, but neither could explain what was happening to their son. The details Daniel provided weren't things a 5-year-old could know. They weren't things most adults would know. They decided to consult Rabbi Avraham Rosenberg, a 70-year-old retired rabbi who had known the family for years. Rosenberg listened carefully as Daniel described the Jerusalem of 2,000 years ago. Street names, the aqueduct system, trading practices, the layout of Herod's palace. "This child is not fantasizing," Rosenberg said quietly to the parents after an hour of conversation. "He's describing a Jerusalem that disappeared 2 millennia ago." The rabbi pulled out his phone and began fact-checking Daniel's statements against historical records. The street names corresponded to Roman documentation. The description of the water infrastructure matched archaeological findings. The trading practices aligned with ancient texts. "Daniel," Rosenberg asked carefully, "do you remember where Pontius Pilate stayed during Passover?" The boy answered without hesitation. He had 2 places: Antonia Fortress next to the temple, and Herod's palace in the upper city. But during Passover, he always stayed at Antonia. He needed to control the crowds. The answer was historically accurate. Rosenberg felt his hands begin to shake. Word of the case began circulating quietly through academic circles in Boston. It reached Dr. Isaac Schreiber, a 49-year-old archaeologist at Harvard University who specialized in Second Temple period Jerusalem. Schreiber had spent his career excavating sites in Israel. He was a skeptic by training and temperament. He had investigated dozens of supposed religious phenomena. All had mundane explanations. He expected this case would be no different. When Schreiber met Daniel in late March, he came prepared with tests designed to expose fabrication or influence from adults. He showed the boy ancient maps of Jerusalem, digital reconstructions based on archaeological digs, photographs of artifacts from the Roman period. Daniel's responses were immediate and visceral. He pointed at a topographical map of the ancient city and traced a specific route with his small finger. "That's the path people took from Sheep Gate to the temple," he explained. "I walked it every morning to get to my shop." Schreiber checked the coordinates against his research. They aligned perfectly with the Decumanus Maximus, the main east-west thoroughfare of Roman Jerusalem, a street that had been buried under centuries of construction and only recently confirmed through excavation. The archaeologist spent weeks testing Daniel. The boy identified oil amphorae typical of Galilean trade. He described the approximate weight of a Roman denarius. He explained how the tax system worked for Jewish merchants under Roman occupation, details that required years of academic study to understand. But the most disturbing moment came when Schreiber showed Daniel a photograph of steps leading to the Siloam pool, uncovered in a 2004 excavation. Daniel went pale. He began trembling. "They brought the wounded here after the riots," he whispered. "There was a man whose back was destroyed by Roman whips. I gave him water. He died in my arms on the third day." Schreiber felt a chill run down his spine. Those steps dated precisely to AD 33, the estimated time of the Crucifixion. Dr. Judith Bergman, a 44-year-old child psychologist with a private practice in Cambridge, was brought in to evaluate Daniel's mental state. She spent 3 hours with him, conducting cognitive tests and structured interviews. Her conclusion was clear but cautious. There are no signs of mental disturbance, childhood schizophrenia, or pathological dissociation. The child shows normal cognitive development for his age in all areas except this specific memory, where he demonstrates knowledge that exceeds any conventional explanation. By May 2024, Daniel's case had attracted Dr. Giovanni Bianchi, a 46-year-old Italian researcher from the University of Virginia who specialized in children who claimed memories of previous lives. Bianchi had documented over 200 such cases, but none with this level of verifiable historical detail. In their first meeting on May 15th, Bianchi used his standard protocol designed to distinguish between childhood fantasy, parental influence, and genuine memory. He asked open-ended questions, avoiding any suggestion. "Daniel, can you tell me what you remember from when you were Reuben?" The boy closed his eyes for a moment, as if searching deep within. Then he spoke with a fluidity that seemed impossible for a 5-year-old. 3 days after Passover, in the year the Romans called 780, rumors reached the market. They said the teacher from Galilee had been executed as a rebel. I had seen him twice preaching in the court of the Gentiles. He wasn't violent. He spoke about love and forgiveness. I didn't understand why Rome feared him so much. Bianchi scribbled notes frantically. The year 780 in the Roman calendar corresponded to AD 33 according to modern historical calculations. Daniel continued. On the 4th day, Roman soldiers began interrogating all the merchants. They were looking for his followers, especially the Galileans. There was fear, great fear. Some merchants closed their shops and fled the city. The level of political and social understanding the child displayed was absolutely incompatible with his age and education. What happened next would provide the first physical evidence. In early June, a multidisciplinary team was assembled by the American Schools of Oriental Research. It included archaeologists, historians, psychologists, and specialists in ancient documents. Dr. Schreiber led the group. Their goal, to test Daniel's claims in the field. On June 18, 2023, They brought Daniel to an active excavation site near the Western Wall in Jerusalem's Old City. The site had recently revealed commercial structures from the Roman period. The test would be definitive. If Daniel truly lived as a merchant in that era, he should be able to navigate the ruins. No prior information was given to the child. His entire reaction was recorded by multiple cameras. When Daniel arrived at the site, his response was immediate. He began shaking, tears filling his eyes. "Here," he whispered, pointing to a specific section of ruins. This was Judah the potter's stand. He was right next to mine. The archaeologists consulted their maps and records. At precisely that location, they had found fragments of storage pottery weeks earlier, along with a seal bearing a Hebrew inscription that read, "Judah, son of Judah." The rest was illegible. The probability of this coincidence was astronomically low. But Daniel wasn't finished. He walked with unsettling familiarity through the ruins. He stopped before what appeared to be simple stone flooring and asked them to dig there. "Under these stones is a compartment," he explained. Reuben hid his profits from his best sales there, away from the eyes of Roman tax collectors. The team, though skeptical, decided to excavate. At a depth of 12 inches, they found a small cavity sealed with ancient mortar. Inside were 3 silver coins, Roman denarii minted during the reign of Tiberius, exactly from the correct period. The discovery sent shockwaves through the archaeological team. Dr. Schreiber ordered thermoluminescence dating of the mortar, which confirmed its age. 1st century AD. The coins were authenticated by the numismatic department at Harvard Semitic Museum. They were genuine, not modern replicas. If your heart just skipped a beat, that like button is right there. The probability that a 5-year-old could randomly point to a 2,000-year-old hiding place was mathematically impossible. Yet here was physical evidence, excavated under strict archaeological protocols, witnessed by multiple experts, and recorded on video. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. Daniel then pointed east to a section of the site that hadn't been excavated yet. His voice was barely audible. "Down there is the house where I hid the woman and the boy, Jesus' mother and the disciple he loved. I hid them for 3 days until they could leave the city safely." Absolute silence followed. The team stood at a crossroads between science, history, and faith. Dr. Schreiber made a decision. "We're going to excavate that area." The excavation of the area Daniel indicated began on June 25, 2022, under strict archaeological protocols and supervision from representatives of both the Israeli Antiquities Authority and the Vatican. The site became one of the most closely watched digs in the world. At a depth of 6 feet, archaeologists found the remains of a residential structure dating precisely to the 1st century. The construction was typical of modest merchant homes of that era. Limestone walls, compacted earth floor, and an underground storage system. But the truly extraordinary discovery came on the 4th day of excavation. In a sealed cavity beneath the main floor, they found a ceramic oil lamp. Epigraphic analysis of the lamp revealed an Aramaic inscription that made the entire team stop breathing. For Reuben Levi, who sheltered the persecuted. The inscription was authentic. It dated to the correct period, and the name matched exactly what Daniel had claimed his identity was in his previous life. Dr. Schreiber stood in the pit, holding the lamp in his gloved hands, unable to speak. Dr. Bianchi, who had documented the case from the beginning, called an impromptu press conference. "In 30 years of investigating cases of past life memories, I have never seen material evidence that supports a child's claims with this level of precision," he stated. "This challenges our entire understanding of consciousness and memory." International media began covering the story. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, all sent teams to Jerusalem. The story of the boy who remembered living in Jesus' time became the biggest media phenomenon of the year. But for Daniel, the public attention became overwhelming. He began having more intense nightmares, not just memories, but trauma reliving itself. He spoke of the terror he felt when Roman soldiers executed 3 men accused of being zealots directly in front of his market stall. He described the sound of nails driven into wood, the smell of blood and sweat, the screams of agony. Dr. David Marks, a 47-year-old child psychiatrist at Massachusetts General Hospital, was brought in to help. His examination revealed symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder, but the trauma wasn't from Daniel's current life. It was from memories he shouldn't possess. The child shows normal cognitive development for his age in all areas, Dr. Marks reported, except for this specific memory, where he demonstrates experiential knowledge of events that occurred 2,000 years ago. Meanwhile, the excavation continued to reveal secrets. Fabric fragments were found that, according to carbon-14 analysis, dated to AD 33, with an error margin of only 5 years. Among the textiles were fragments of a woolen cloak dyed with Tyrian purple, an extremely expensive dye that only people of high rank could afford. Daniel, when shown photographs of the fragments, explained, "The woman wore that cloak when she arrived at my house. It was torn and covered with street dust. I gave her and the boys simple merchant's clothes so they wouldn't be noticed." The description of Miriam needing disguise, of being in danger, aligned with what would have been the historical reality after the execution of her son. On July 15, 2023, the Vatican officially dispatched Monsignore Vincenzo Martino, a 61-year-old expert from the Congregation for the Causes of Saints, to evaluate the theological implications of the case. Martino was known for his rigorous skepticism. He had rejected 90% of alleged miracles he had investigated in his career. His first meeting with Daniel lasted more than 4 hours. He showed the child images of early Christian iconography, Byzantine art, and modern reconstructions of biblical figures, asking if he recognized anyone. Daniel rejected most of them as inaccurate. "She didn't look like that," he said, pointing to a traditional depiction of Mary. "She was shorter. Her skin was darker from the sun. Her eyes were honey-colored, not blue. She was always sad, with a sadness that seemed heavier than the whole world." The description corresponded to the historical reality of a first-century Jewish woman, not later European idealizations. Martino continued with complex theological questions. "What did she and the young man tell you while they were in your house?" Daniel closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were filled with tears. "She didn't speak much. She only cried quietly with a pain I couldn't comprehend. The boy, he wasn't much more than a teenager, took tender care of her. He told me his teacher had instructed them to look after each other. He spoke to me of teachings about love that conquers death, about forgiving even enemies. I didn't understand how they could speak of love after what had happened." Daniel's account contained profound theological elements that a 5-year-old could not possibly have invented on his own. Stories like this don't end here. If you want to explore where faith meets the unexplained, join us. Monsignore Vincenzo Martino decided to conduct what he considered a decisive test. He brought Daniel to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the site traditionally believed to be the place of crucifixion. The child's reaction was visceral and devastating. Even before reaching Golgotha, Daniel began hyperventilating. I can't be here. The smell of death is still here. I see the crosses. I see the blood on the stones." He suffered such a severe panic attack that he had to be immediately removed. 2 psychologists present confirmed the reaction was not feigned. This was genuine terror from someone reliving real trauma. That night, Martino wrote in his report to the Vatican, "I've investigated hundreds of cases and can distinguish fraud from authenticity. This child carries in his memory testimony of events that changed human history. I cannot explain it scientifically, but I cannot deny it either." While the theological debate intensified, the scientific community searched for alternative explanations. Some neuroscientists proposed the hypothesis of genetic memory, the idea that information could be transmitted through DNA. Extensive genetic analyses were conducted on Daniel and his family, searching for connections to ancient Levantine populations. The results were surprising. Daniel carried Jewish ancestral genetic markers that could be traced directly to populations in first-century Judea. The findings were published in peer-reviewed journals, adding another layer of mystery to an already inexplicable case. On August 5, 2024, during a therapy session with Dr. Marks, Daniel made a statement that would leave both scientists and theologians in stunned silence. He described an event he claimed to have personally witnessed: the resurrection of Jesus. It was early morning on the third day after the crucifixion. He began, his voice trembling. "I was with them at my house. The woman hadn't slept for 3 days. She only wept and prayed. Suddenly, just before dawn, she stood up, abruptly. Her eyes lit up in a way I had never seen before. She said only one word: Jesus." Daniel described how Johannes felt it too. They looked at each other and knew something Daniel couldn't understand. They ran from his house toward the tomb. Hours later, they returned transformed, Daniel continued, with a joy that stood in absolute contrast to the devastation of the previous days. Dr. Marks, though not religious, was struck by the emotional coherence of the story. He described complex emotional states that require very advanced theory of mind, he explained in his report. He spoke of the transformation from grief to hope with psychological depth that no 5-year-old could invent. But the most extraordinary detail came next. Daniel mentioned something that appeared in none of the canonical Gospels. When she came back, she carried in her hands a white lily that she said she found right at the entrance of the empty tomb. She gave it to me as thanks for my protection. I dried it and kept it between the pages of a Torah scroll I had in my house. He described the exact location of this scroll in his former residence. The archaeological team, still working at the site identified as Reuben's house, directed their attention to the area that would have served as storage space for personal items. Using ground-penetrating radar technology, they identified a sealed cavity in the eastern wall of the structure. Careful excavation revealed a niche carved into the stone. Inside, protected by centuries of dried sediment, they found extremely deteriorated parchment fragments. Analysis at the Harvard Semitic Museum Conservation Laboratory was meticulous. The fragments indeed corresponded to a first-century Torah scroll. But between the parchment layers, they found something that took researchers' breath away: organic remains of a flower, preserved by the extreme dryness of the environment. Botanical analysis identified the species as Lilium candidum, the traditional white lily of the region. The carbon-14 dating of the flower remains produced a result that caused international shock. AD 33, with an error margin of plus or minus 8 years. The statistical probability that all these elements would coincidentally align, according to calculations by MIT Brain and Cognitive Sciences, was approximately 1 in 100 million. The Daniel Cohen case had transcended scientific research and become a phenomenon that questioned the boundaries between faith, science, and history. Someone you know is waiting for this story. Send it to them. In September 2022, Daniel began experiencing what his parents and therapists described as prophetic visions. The boy claimed Reuben had received visions about Jerusalem's future in his final days. During a session recorded on September 12th, Daniel described with frightening accuracy the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans in AD 70. Reuben saw it. He lived through the beginning of the Great Revolt, Daniel recounted. He saw the first signs, the growing discontent, how the zealots gained power, how Roman oppression intensified. In his later years, he had dreams where he saw the temple in flames, the walls destroyed, thousands of Jews enslaved. He died a year before the war began, but he knew it was coming. He tried to warn others, but few listened. What was extraordinary was that Daniel provided details about events before the Great Jewish Revolt that were only documented in specialized historical texts, such as the writings of Flavius Josephus. He mentioned names of zealot leaders, dates of specific incidents between Jews and Romans, and descriptions of political tensions that perfectly matched historical records. Professor Joshua Cohn, a 56-year-old historian from Yale University who specialized in the Second Temple period, was astounded. This child is quoting details that are only known to scholars with years of study. He's describing the political and social atmosphere of Jerusalem between AD 33 and 66 with accuracy that would make any historian envious. But Daniel's most remarkable prophecy concerned not the past, but the future. On September 20th, during a visit to the archaeological site, the boy entered a trance-like state. His voice, which his parents described as different, deeper, as if another person were speaking through him, uttered words that were recorded. The message that the sorrowful woman carried in her heart was never fully understood. She knew that her son's love would break the chains of hatred between peoples. Jerusalem will see days when the children of Abraham, from all branches of his family, will walk together in peace. The witness that I was, Reuben Levi, saw only the beginning, but the future will bring fulfillment. The message, with its implications of reconciliation between Jews, Christians, and Muslims, resonated deeply in a region marked by millennia of conflict. Daniel's words were interpreted in many ways. For some believers, it was a divine message transmitted through the child. For scientists, it was a manifestation of collective or unconscious memory. For skeptics, it remained an unsolved mystery. Monsignore Martino wrote in his final report to the Vatican on September 30th, "I cannot state with theological certainty that this is a miracle in the strict sense, but I can affirm that we are dealing here with a phenomenon that surpasses purely material explanations. This child carries a testimony that humanity must hear." On October 15, 2023, all findings of the Daniel Cohen case were officially presented at an international conference in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Over 300 experts from 40 countries participated, including archaeologists, historians, theologians, neuroscientists, psychologists, and philosophers. Dr. Schreiber presented the material evidence, the coins, the oil lamp with the inscription, the Torah scroll fragments, and the lily remains. Each piece had been subjected to multiple authenticity tests by independent laboratories on 3 continents. All evidence confirmed the same impossible conclusion. The objects were genuine, dated from the 1st century, and corresponded exactly to descriptions by a 5-year-old child who could not have had access to this information through conventional means. Professor Bianchi presented the complete psychological analysis. After 9 months of intense study, including over 100 hours of recorded interviews, cognitive tests, speech pattern analyses, and neuropsychological evaluations, his conclusion was cautious but shocking. "We cannot explain this case with any known model of cognitive development in children, memory, or knowledge acquisition," he stated. Daniel Cohen demonstrates experiential knowledge about historical events that took place 2,000 years ago. Regardless of how we interpret this phenomenon, metaphysically or scientifically, we are faced with something that challenges our current understanding of human consciousness. The room fell into absolute silence when his presentation ended. Several academics had tears in their eyes. Others shook their heads in disbelief. The gap between what science can explain and what reality presents had never been so obvious. For Daniel and his family, life had changed irreversibly. The child continued weekly therapy, learning to integrate memories that did not belong to his current life. His parents struggled with the weight of worldwide attention. Rabbi Rosenberg provided spiritual support, though he himself wrestled with questions that had no easy answers. The physical evidence remained undeniable. The oil lamp with Reuben's name sat in a climate-controlled case at Harvard's Semitic Museum. The coins rested in archival storage. The lily fragments, preserved in specialized containers, represented something science could measure, but not explain. Dr. Marks, in his final psychological evaluation, wrote, "Daniel shows no signs of delusion or mental illness. He's a normal 5-year-old boy who happens to carry memories that shouldn't exist. He experiences genuine trauma from events he witnessed 2 millennia ago. He grieves for people who died before he was born, and he does so with an emotional authenticity that is impossible to fake." The Vatican's official position remained carefully neutral. In a statement released in November 2023, the Church acknowledged the Holy See is aware of the extraordinary evidence presented in the Daniel Cohen case. While we cannot make definitive theological pronouncements, we recognize that this phenomenon invites serious contemplation about the nature of consciousness, memory, and the mysteries of human existence. But perhaps the most profound impact was on those who met Daniel personally. Dr. Schreiber, the archaeologist who began as a skeptic, admitted in a private interview, "Came to this case prepared to debunk it. I left questioning everything I thought I knew about reality. The evidence doesn't lie. Something happened here that our current scientific framework cannot accommodate." Giovanni Bianchi, who had spent his career studying children with past life memories, stated, "In 200 cases, I've never encountered physical evidence that validates a child's claims. Daniel Cohen changes everything. This isn't just about one boy. This is about what it means to be human, to have consciousness, to exist across time." The Cohen family tried to return to normal life, but normal no longer existed for them. Daniel's story had been featured in documentaries, academic journals, and news programs in dozens of languages. The boy who remembered Golgotha had become a symbol of mystery, of possibility, of the limits of human understanding. In December 2024, Daniel turned 6. The memories of Reuben Levi began to gradually fade, as if their purpose had been fulfilled. Neuroscientists who studied his case, including researchers from MIT, published their findings in Nature Neuroscience. Daniel's functional MRIs during his memory episodes showed patterns of brain activation that were incompatible with invention or imagination, but also did not correspond to normal episodic memory. It was a pattern that had never been documented in scientific literature before. The final question remained unanswered. How could a child born in 2019 possess detailed, verifiable memories of events from AD 33? The conference in Cambridge produced a document signed by representatives from multiple disciplines. Its conclusion was unprecedented in academic history. We have encountered a phenomenon that exceeds the explanatory capacity of our current scientific models. The evidence is material, measurable, and reproducible, yet it points to a reality we do not yet understand. Daniel himself, when asked by a journalist what he wanted people to take away from his story, gave an answer with the simple wisdom of a child. "I don't know why it happened to me. Maybe it was to remind the world that truth matters, even when it's hard to accept." At age 6, Daniel decided he no longer wanted to give interviews. He wanted to be a normal child. He wanted to play with friends, go to school, live the life of a 6-year-old. His parents supported this decision, creating boundaries to protect their son from the constant media attention. The legacy of the Daniel Cohen case extended far beyond his childhood. It sparked a new wave of historical research about Jesus of Nazareth, combining academic rigor with openness to extraordinary phenomena. The debate between faith and science became enriched with nuance and humility from both sides. And every year, a small ecumenical ceremony at the Western Wall gathers Christians, Jews, and secular scholars before the excavation site, not to impose a truth, but to celebrate the shared search for understanding. On the silver star marking the floor of the site, Someone placed a small plaque with a simple inscription in Hebrew, Aramaic, and English. Truth is the path to God, whatever his name may be. Daniel Cohen, now 6 years old, continues therapy at Massachusetts General Hospital. Dr. Marks reports steady progress. The memories are fading, but they have left their mark. Daniel sometimes draws pictures of ancient Jerusalem without realizing it. He occasionally uses Aramaic words he shouldn't know, and when he passes churches, he grows quiet, as if hearing echoes from a life he once lived. The archaeological site remains open for study. New findings continue to emerge, but none as shocking as what Daniel revealed in his first year of fame. Science cannot explain Daniel Cohen, but it cannot deny him either. And perhaps that is the most important lesson, that reality is larger than our ability to comprehend it, that mystery exists even in an age of technology and reason, and that some truths can only be approached with humility. The boy who remembered Golgotha grew up, but the questions he raised will remain for generations to come.